This is Russell Moore, and this is Reading in Exile, where we come together and just pull some books off the shelf here in my library and talk about them. And today would have been the 111th birthday of Eudora Welty. If my math is right, she was born on this date in 1909. I put this up on Instagram this morning. It's an artist's rendition of Miss Eudora done on a library card. For those of you too young to have ever seen one of these, they're the cards that people used to have to fill out when they checked out books before they could do it on computer. So I've been kind of looking at that today and thinking about her. And several people have been asking what books or stories would I recommend, where to start with Eudora Welty, because I said in that post that she is, first of all, a great Mississippian from Jackson, and also that she is someone who is one of the greatest writers in the entire American canon, bar none. And so people have asked where to start. This is a first edition of Selected Stories of Eudora Welty, signed by her, that was given to me by Al Moeller as a Christmas present one year, and I really treasure that. Here is a current paperback version of that, of her collected stories. Honestly, you can start anywhere, and you're not going to have a bad experience with any of Miss Eudora's writings. But I would say if I wanted to start, where I would recommend that you start is her short story, Why I Live at the P.O. And this is one of the rare times when I will say not to read something first, but to listen to it. There's on YouTube, just put in Eudora Welty, Why I Live at the P.O. There's a video that will come up of her reading this short story in her own voice. And it's just magnificent. And it includes the text with it as she's reading it. And I recommended that to someone this morning on Instagram. And she wrote back and said, yeah, I would recommend that they read it at 75% speed, because she speaks pretty quickly. That's probably true. So any of those short stories. With her novels, my favorite of her novels is this one, The Optimist's Daughter, which won the Pulitzer Prize. But Ponderheart is a good novel as well. This is a neat book. I really like this Eudora Welty on William Faulkner that the University of Mississippi Press did several years ago. But here are two that I would really recommend. I mean, this is her One Writer's Beginnings, which is sort of her life story about growing up in Mississippi as a little girl. And, here's one of the things that she has to say. She's talking about growing up in the church, in the Methodist church. And she says, how many of us, the South's writers-to-be of my generation, were blessed in one way or another, if not blessed alike, in not having gone deprived of the King James Version of the Bible. Its cadence entered into our ears and our memories for good. The evidence or the ghost of it lingers in all our books. In the beginning was the Word. I mentioned that on the first of these Reading in Exile episodes that we have. And the funny thing is, as I was thinking about this morning, I then listened to Terry Gross, Fresh Air, had an interview with Stephen King today. And he talked about the influence of the King James Bible on him. He's not somebody who's a believer in any way that we would recognize it, but he reads the KJV all the time because of the cadences and lyrics of it. I really don't know a really great writer who hasn't been influenced by the King James Version. So maybe we can talk about that more later on. But there's just a lot of moments in this autobiography that's just kind of laugh out loud to me. And maybe it's just because I had a similar upbringing. But she's talking about Methodist hymns, for instance, although the hymns she's talking about aren't uniquely Methodist. We had the same ones. But she says, these Methodist hymns all sounded happy and pleased with the world, even though the words ran quite the other way. Throw out the lifeline. Throw out the lifeline. Someone is sinking today. Went to a cheering tune. I was sinking deep in sin, far from the peaceful shore, very deeply stayed within, sinking to rise no more. Made you want to dance. And the chorus, love lifted me, when nothing else would help, love lifted me, would send you leaping. I mean, that just, there's just so much about that is true and hits right at that sort of experience. And she gets those little moments and really unwinds them and shows you what those things are about. And that's what she does in her fiction. So there's so many things in here that I could reference for you that I enjoyed. She was talking about a relative who would cite, "He who calleth his brother a fool," she'd interrupt us, "is in danger of hellfire. I think she never in her life called anyone a fool, though she never bore one gladly, but she would say, well, it appears to me that Mrs. So-and-so is the least bit limited." I mean, well, there it is. I mean, that just sort of sums up Bible Belt manners. And then this, I would recommend to anybody, her on writing, especially the section, Must the Novelist Crusade. And, if I ever teach preaching again like I used to do, I think I'm going to have all the students read that, because she makes a really good point in there where she says that a plot is more unsettling than any argument. And the immersion in a plot is more transformative than syllogisms competing. That's exactly right. And that's why the Bible is inspired that way as a plot line. And even when you get to the more syllogistic sounding, more logical sounding expositions, say in the letters of Paul, those are all pointing you to the plot line and making arguments that show you how to fit into the plot line that God has revealed in Jesus Christ, and that is Jesus Christ. He is the plot line. See, now you're going to get me preaching, but good essay, Should the Novelist Crusade? And it answers question. I found that there are a lot of people who have a sort of Stalinist view of art, which is the idea that art ought to simply be a container for whatever the argument is that one wants to make, which is why there are people who will say, oh, well, I won't read Wendell Berry because I disagree with his views on fill in the blank, or, oh, I really don't want to read Faulkner because of his defective views that he had on race, or so forth. Wherever that is, what she's arguing here is that writing is not meant to make an argument so much as writing is to reveal feeling, both good and bad. So I won't unpack her whole argument here, but it's one that I would commend you to read. So that's Eudora Welty. Let me know what you would like for us to talk about here at Reading in Exile in the comments.